This is a supplemental to Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast. Our guests today are Invictus, Proxema, Domkek, Marius, and map makers Ivaan and Ancient Demise. Originally, this was going to be an episode several years ago, but the editing was never finished, and some of the information is now out of date. This is an episode on weapons. So without further ado, here it is.
Sensors indicate friendly dropship has entered atmosphere. ETA dropship 1 minute. All systems nominal.
So, Proxima, what in the world is a weapon? What's a weapon?
You point it at a person, you pull the trigger, and you see fireworks happen.
Wait a minute, but what about Long Tom? Do you point it at them or do you point it at the sky?
Depends on how brave I'm feeling and whether or not my aim is good or off that day.
Your enemies
what if-
there are birds.
What if they're SRMs and you have to shoot them in front?
Yes. But no, the weapons used in this game are based off of, I want to say, real life weaponry, or you can definitely relate to a lot of the stuff that's here in real life, like lasers. Of course,
There are real lasers in real life, and there are military lasers in real life. There are Gauss rifles or railguns in real life.
Or let's put it like this: currently there's two types of weapon groups. You have your energy and you have your solids. Solids, of course, are your missiles, your bullets like your autocannons, machine guns, Gauss rifles, and then of course you have your energy weapons like PPCs. I guess you can lump flamers into that if you want. And then, of course, everybody loves their lasers. And then, of course, you have your bigger weapons like your artillery pieces, like the Thumper, which is direct fire artillery. Then you have your Long Tom, which is the strongest single-shot weapon in the game. And then you have Arrow 4s, which is literally a bigger version of what a missile is. It's just huge.
Artillery area of effect missile.
Correct. And that's primarily it currently as far as I'm aware of for weapons.
Are you saying that we don't have electro whips?
Unfortunately, no. Melee, unfortunately, is something we do not have either. I mean, I guess if you want to ram into someone and hopefully destroy their leg actuator, because Crysis engine physics.
No Dachi versus Axeman when?
Invictus, I'll let you answer that one.
Never.
Oh,
Yeah, it is a little sad that Melee has gone by the wayside, but as I understand it, it's just not really something the engine can properly handle.
I think it would be like if the aerospace were spinning out of control when you hit something, but that was mechs instead.
And I remember with Death from Above, the reason we don't have that melee option is because just moving around the map and falling off of a small ledge, like, it's not a perfect physics engine, and that just a small fall might miscalculate or something just in the engine, and suddenly, or in the game engine, and suddenly you've lost a whole leg just from a short fall because it registered it as a taller fall than you thought. Does that sound about right, Invictus?
Well, it also, you're asking for more desyncs with the server when you start doing weird stuff like that.
wouldn't it also start affecting your frame rate?
No. I mean, it's not that many calculations. It just asks what do, and then if anything stupid goes wrong, then it'll start to freak out.
Man, even in the real-time strategy Battletech, not real-time strategy, the turn-based strategy Battletech game that I've played the demo a few times, and the death from above from that they don't even land on top of the other mechs. But they do have melee, other than that. When they do death from above, they just jump behind them or jump next to them and then do a punch or a kick or whatever.
I mean, our mechs are so tough it would be hard to interpret that anyway. If we can take like 10 Gauss shots to the CT, well, why is a leg falling from like 100 feet doing anything?
But yeah, as for weapons, Proxima, what's your favorite weapon?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. I would have to say it would probably be lasers. The reason why I say lasers is mainly because lasers are just a very good multi-role, multi-purpose weapon.
And reliable.
And very reliable. Like, you can easily just... If it's the large laser, you can quickly poke and then get back into cover, wait for your weapons to cycle. Close range lasers are very good, like the medium pulse, small pulse lasers are very good up close. Shooting down aircraft specifically, like the laser instantly hits the aircraft, and all you have to do is maintain like that 0.5 second time that the laser is firing on the aircraft. And then you're good to go, and you can keep harassing aircraft like this without really too much aiming at all.
It's not quite like a AC2, a UAC2, where you have to fire, readjust your aim, fire, readjust, fire, try to constantly readjust, constantly lead it. It's changing speed, you're changing speed, you're moving, you're traversing. Oh, so many different things to consider when firing those UAC2s.
The AC2s, it is really all about leading. Like if you're in a Partisan, like say for example the Iraq Partisan, even with things that are moving on the ground, that you still have to lead. Aircraft are of course more difficult because, well, shit, they're moving a lot faster and they're a little bit more nimble than something that's on the ground. The other thing of it is too is zoom range. If you haven't noticed, if you're zoomed very far out and you're trying to lead, if the asset that you're shooting at is actually moving out of your point of view and you're zoomed out, you literally have, zoomed in, you literally have to zoom out and then readjust zoom in addition to leading. Because your actual turret or your torso will start moving incredibly slowly.
And I believe I heard from Invictus years ago that that's something that's hard-coded into the engine for the zooming.
And it's a good thing too, because if you got a twitchy hand, the last thing you want to do is jerk your mech around while you're shooting.
Yeah, but I've got a sensitivity thing on my mouse.
Is it set to max?
Well, I can adjust it back and forth on the fly. I can adjust my DPI, and I'd rather adjust it on my mouse than have my game force me into lower sensitivity.
But I don't think you can turn faster after a point, so there will always be a limit.
Yeah, eventually your asset's gonna limit to your turn speed.
Yeah, well, I personally, at least just from how I play the game, I would like it such that when you zoom in, it doesn't affect your ability to aim. It doesn't affect the speed at which you're aiming. However, I can understand how for most people, people who don't necessarily have something where they can adjust the sensitivity on the fly.
I don't think most people actually know about that, though. As a
Like,
matter of fact, I didn't even know that until you brought it up.
I typically adjust my sensitivity on my mouse, like when I go between battle armor and mechs. But yeah, when you zoom in, losing that, that's one of the things with riflemen that I found very difficult, is it's hard to zoom in and maintain your fire on a target, because if it's traversing too quickly across your screen, zooming in doesn't help. You need to stay zoomed out to keep the same sensitivity.
I mean, that's a staple for almost all shooting games.
I do have a question, Invictus, when it comes to weapons. I know that there are, you've placed weapons on clan assets that are clan weapons, and inner sphere weapons on inner sphere assets because that's inner sphere stuff. In lore, during the Dark Ages of Sarna, there came a point where clan tech and inner sphere tech actually intermingled. Never put clan tech weaponry on inner sphere assets.
The default answer is no. We don't really consider the timeline that advanced to do that. I know somewhat fairly early, even the clans got access to the Rack 5, I believe. Was it Hell's Horse?
It was Hell's Horses.
Yeah, made their own version. And even that, I just hesitate on. So the answer is pretty much no. I mean, the latest thing we have in the timeline now, when we get it in, is going to be the Rusalka, because it's a little late. After the 3067 usual cutoff. And half the weapons, special weapons we have in the game, they were invented in time, but in reality, I mean, you would have seen like 2 of them.
Like the X-Pulse laser.
Yeah, they were only really in use like 20, 30 years later in any sort of numbers, but I mean...
Oh, it sounds like for the X-Pulse laser, it was almost 100 years later before they really started using them.
Yeah, I mean, the X-Pulse, when you look at it in CBT, it's just kind of a pointless, terrible weapon. So it was always an uphill battle to get it to make sense in the game. And I think even to this day, the large pulse laser just doesn't make sense. I mean, in order for... I've been trying to build it into pairs or, have 3 of them or something like that. You just can never find enough double heat sinks. The weapon itself is too heavy. It takes up too much space. I mean, clan weapons are really hot, yeah, like a heavy large laser, but a heavy large laser is only 5 tons, whereas the large X-Pulse is 7. And it really starts to add up when you start multiplying those and you're getting rid of 3, 4, 5, 6 double heat sinks. It's just, no, it's not going to happen.
Did you deliberately tone down the heat generation of the weapon to make it viable, though?
Oh, I've done... I mean, the current large X-Pulse is like the dream version compared to the CVT version. I mean, it's way better in every way, and even then, just the way it's designed, it's... Except for like one on like either that Chevalier or the one on the Bushwhacker, it's just not viable. The mediums are going to beat it up basically every time.
Yeah, long range and DPS just don't really go together very well.
I mean, that was one of the reasons why I refused to bring back the constant firing AC5, because the only real point of it, when you compare it to the 10 and the 20, is that it has more range. And even when you compare it to... It had to basically act like a alternative to a large laser, but be much less heat. Because the weight in CBT is way more, but we've made tweaks to where, it's like 7 tons for a UAC 5 compared to 5 tons for a large laser IS, so it's not too bad. The ammo starts to get in the way, especially with the ultras, but you can't really... Just like the large laser, if its main deal over mediums is that it has more range, if you can't hit that at range reliably, it's a pointless weapon. So people used to like have fun, I guess, with the Bodhi UAC 5s, the old siege engine, where you just kind of sit at range and sandpaper to death until they found cover. Well, the new one, you can just chunk damage, so it's more naturally competing with Gauss rifles and large lasers and things that it should naturally be competing with.
Would you ever?
Oh, go ahead.
Would you ever bring back the Daishi with the 5 Ultra 5s?
Probably not.
Or was that just too broken to begin with, especially now with the new adjustments to the Ultra 5s?
I mean, Vlad originally made it. I told him it was stupid, and he kind of laughed and said, well, that's the point. He kind of wanted a stupid variant. And back then he was doing so much work and, contributing so much to the mod that I was like, okay, if you want to do it, you've earned the right. But afterwards, it actually wasn't that good. I think with the new one, it probably would be pretty silly because it's all up front. And it's just, because they were all kind of stuffed into one arm and that was supposed to be like the drawback, and stuff like that I don't like, because it's kind of like, if it was another kind of mech that wasn't a Daishi, I would say okay. But on a Daishi, you kind of just want a large variety of weapons, big and small. That's kind of what the point of the mech is. So if you could fit it on a Masakari, which by the way you probably couldn't, something that's just dedicated to boating the same type of thing, then yes. It's not so much that I think it would be too OP, it just doesn't fit the personality of the mech. And I don't think we have anything in the game that really it would fit in.
So before we go on farther, I wanted to mention that Domkek is now here, and it'd be nice to have his input too on some of this stuff. We are talking about weapons.
I'm content to listen for now. It sounded like Proxy and Invictus had something good going, but thank you.
I think for balance purposes, Invictus, it seems like you want to scatter weapons all over a mech instead of keeping it in one spot. So that way, if you blow off an arm, it's not a big deal. You still have the same weapon types in, say, the center torso, side torso, and the other arm.
Exactly, Alan. The old chainsaw Daishi, which is still in the game with the 2 UAC 10s and the UAC 20, that originally had everything in the same arm. I mean, all the UACs were in the same arm, so it was like, that was supposed to be the quote-unquote drawback. But first of all, I mean, if you're trying to come from the tabletop at all, stuffing 3 large autocannons into one part, crit-wise, is totally impossible. And so it already seems a little gamey, and it was just kind of an artificial, this is supposed to be the quote-unquote drawback. And for something like a Hollander, well, that's the point, where you have to stuff everything in one big gun, sure, but the point of the Daishi is to have it spread out everywhere, so after a while, and this was several patches ago, I went ahead and just moved everything out, and I think the UAC 20s, is it up in the external, away from the arms? Oh.
Are you talking about the chainsaw, right?
Yes.
I think the Ultra 20 is in the right arm, and the 2 Ultra 10s are in the left.
In the left? So the externals missiles?
Externals missiles.
But yeah, I was just trying to spread everything around so that it's not all or nothing, because when it becomes everyone facing you, that's like the obvious decision. It kind of just makes the game silly. Unless it's the whole entire mech was built off that idea.
Speaking of balances, specifically with the newest weapon that you have released, the Heavy PPC, I know you were having some issues with making it viable, because otherwise, without the damage increase, it's really pointless. Even though you still did the damage increase with the Heavy PPC, the Awesome Charlie with the 4 PPCs still would out DPS whatever asset that heavy PPC is in, per se.
And I think it should, because the loadout on that Awesome, 4 PPCs is just 24 tons of weapons. And 2 HPPCs, should they ever be on anything, would only be 18 tons. It's kind of like the same thing between, taking an LBX-20 and 4 LBX-5s. 4 LBX-5s is just going to flat out be better, because it's double the weight. And I think in the LBX-5 case, it's even more than double. I think it's like 28 tons versus like 13 tons for an LBX-20. So it's just flat out superior. And that's the way it should be. Because, an Awesome could fit that, but maybe a Rifleman. But there's not very many mechs that you could just stack that many PPCs. I mean, not even the Atlas can do that. And not really a Fafnir, I don't think, can do that either. So it's just very specific.
So if you were building a 2 PPC heavy PPC asset, would it be the Fafnir?
Yes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, haven't we been down on Fafnirs for a while? The missing one?
Yes, there's been an odd number. Mostly just I couldn't think of something that was needed. Because before we got the new weapons in, it was just kind of like...
Light Gauss, Gauss.
I was thinking more along if I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be doing this, but just as a suggestion, 2 heavy PPCs and 2 regular PPCs for that Fafnir.
Actually, I have something weirder. You'll see.
PPCs and Hag, I assume, right?
No.
The weirdest.
But in that same vein.
Now, I do have one more question, and then it goes back to the X-Pulse lasers, since you were kind of going on about how the large X-Pulse is, like, awful in its own right. The Awesome that was boating the 3 X-Pulse lasers, why was that taken out? If the X-Pulse laser was, in fact, improved on not too long ago.
Because we tried it. I mean, that was supposed to be the flagship chance for that Awesome. And we tried it in competitive, and I tried it in pubs, and it was still bad. I mean, even the Rifleman, because the thing about it is that in the best case scenario, the only way the large X-Pulse is going to work is if you can sit far enough away to actually hit things, but then no one pays attention to you. When you take an Awesome, everyone's going to pay attention to you, unless everyone else is in assault mechs. And if everyone else is in assault mechs, you don't want to be in an Awesome.
The only time I ever used that Awesome to any great effect was when I was on a map with a lot of water, and I would dunk the Awesome in the water. People wouldn't be able to see me very well, and then I would just shoot them constantly with the X-Pulse lasers.
So the Innisphere version of the Anaconda.
Yeah.
Except 3 times as tall.
Yeah. So it required deeper water.
And really the damage probably wouldn't have been the same, and the heat would be more, so it's just overall worse Anaconda.
Oh, it's Innisphere.
And speaking of weapons, it's just there's a lot of leeway we can have with interpretation of weapons, since, Battletech, some weapons are just flat out bad, like the large X-Pulse, and in the next patch, I'm planning on getting a light PPC in. The design is pretty much finished. Hasn't gone through a bunch of testing, but the interesting thing about it is when you look at it in Battletech, basically all it is like half a PPC. I think it does half the damage for most of the range. It's 3 tons, so it's a little less than half the weight, half the heat, it's half everything basically. Even in the description, it's just sort of a medium laser. It's like a fatter medium laser. So, I mean, that's 5 damage for 3 tons, which in CVT is 5 damage for 1 ton for 1 medium laser. And even in WLL, it's 5 damage for 2 tons. So that the basic model wasn't really going to cut it so much. But there was more to it when you put it in a video game. And one of the things the PPC does that no laser does is that it gives screen shake and gives splash damage. The screen shake is still there. It's at half power, so that's consistent. The splash is actually maybe a little less than half as far as the area, because splash, even if the overall damage pinpoint is half, if the splash area is large still, that actually adds. It's one of the reasons why the heavy PPC actually probably effectively does a little more damage than just the base 20 that we base it off of, because the splash is so huge. It was actually supposed to only be like 130% to 150%. I think it's beyond that now. I think Thunderbird, one of our testers, suggested he really wanted the splash to be huge to make the weapon unique, and the rest of the testers were kind of seconding him. So in the final version, the version that's in game now, actually has way more splash damage. So in effect, to go back to your point about the 4 PPCs being better, in a way, even though the DPS pure for the PPCs would be better, the upfront damage for the HPPCs would actually be more, because you would always be hitting more sections. So light PPC, if it has less splash and it's smaller, the thing that would obviously it would have going for it, which is a change from the pure CBT interpretation, is that I knew it had to fire faster. And the trade-off for firing faster, besides just being, less damage up front, to keep it from being a troll weapon, because if you're sitting at 700 and you're just, you have stacked 4 or 5 light PPCs, you could just keep pecking people away. That sounded a little gross. So what I did is went ahead and shortened the range to 450 meters. So by doing that, it gives the inner sphere a shake weapon that now competes with the clan streak, because since a few patches ago, clan streaks have 450 meters, I believe, instead of the 350 that the IS did. That was a relatively recent change that I finally got in, because that's how it is in CBT. They have better range. It's just flat out better clan stuff. And for the longest time, they were both 350. And, streaks used to have a reputation of being, kind of bad outside of the cheese wheel vulture. But now IS should have something that will be a little bit like a clan streak, in that at 450, you'll be able to more stun lock someone. So there'll be some light mechs with, maybe 2, and then a heavy mech with, I believe, 3, and then another heavy with 4.
Can we have an Osiris with 2 light Gauss or light PPCs?
Oh, there's actually another mech that's gonna have feature dual light PPCs. The Osiris is gonna pretty much keep its variance. So. All right. Really, the purpose of the weapon is going to be more brawl support, and
less jump sniping.
That way it really plays completely differently than a normal PPC, and even an HPPC plays differently than a PPC, and the ER PPC plays differently. So you're able to, instead of having them all interchangeable for just pointless reasons, like if the weight and damage of taking 1 PPC or 2 light PPCs is pretty much the same, it's hard to have a justification for actually adding the light PPC. So by changing the way it functions, we give it a unique role, and that's what I've tried to do with pretty much every weapon in the game. So in the next patch, you can look for that.
So let me ask you this. Go ahead, Kentax.
Oh yeah, one of the ideas I'd had for light PPCs was that they might cause slightly more EM interference than regular PPC. So like 2 light PPCs would cause maybe 10 to 30% more EM interference than one regular PPC.
Yeah, because of our lack of flash support right now, dev-wise, stuff like EM interference is just on the permanent back burner.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have a close-range PPC-ass weapon, and I assume that the cooldown is half, correct?
I think it's just like the HPPC in that we're not looking at, 100%. We're looking really at 50%. So I think it'll fire just like the HPPC fires 150% slower. I believe it fires 150% faster. I'm not quite sure. I might have gone for 140%, but it's either 140 or 150. It's around there.
So why not implement the snub-nose PPC instead of the light PPC? I mean, considering if it's going to be a close-range weapon, the snub-nose PPC by design was specifically built for that purpose.
Well, the problem with that is that the snub-nose PPC doesn't need to exist in this game because PPCs don't have minimum range, whereas in CBT they do. And we actually thought about back in 0.7 when we came back. That was one of the many things that I considered is giving PPCs. And remember, this was back when Clan ER PPCs were just the god weapon. The Nerf bat things, I thought, well, maybe they should have a minimum range. And in CBT, I don't think it's that you couldn't hit so much as that you had a chance of hurting yourself because it would arc back. Now, that really was never going to happen without a bunch of code, but I could make it to where it has a safe mode that if it hits within, for the first, it's like reverse damage fall off. For the first, 100 meters or so, it just wouldn't do any damage. And the snub-nose PPC, I believe in CBT, that's the point of it, is that you're able to just brawl with it, whereas in this game you can brawl with any sort of PPC. So I guess that would be my answer to that question.
Fair point. And if EMP like statistics or status effects did exist, I believe, going off of what Kentax saying, if snub-nose PPC did exist, then yeah, I would say make that like a brawl weapon, but at the same time, it's really punishing that perhaps that would give a very good EMP effect to your cockpit. More so than other PPCs? Just as a suggestion. Or an idea, rather.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the light PPC has over the snub-nose is that snub-nose would just be another large weapon. And light PPCs are going to be
actually smaller.
Yeah, considered medium weapons. So that's why you're going to see them on much smaller assets that you normally wouldn't be able to see a PPC on.
I mean, this isn't how it's going to work, but hypothetically, if you imagine a solitaire could only fit one snub nose, but a solitaire could hypothetically maybe fit 3 light PPCs. I know that's wrong tech, but
I mean, for instance, there'll be 2 light PPCs on a harasser. There used to be a PPC on a harasser. It just looked stupid. It was too big of a weapon. And so now that we have light PPCs, I could just put a couple light PPCs on there. And now since it has 4 medium lasers on one of them and stuff like that, it doesn't bother me anymore. And also, it makes more sense on a harasser because, it's better at harassing than a single PPC would be. So it's situations like that.
yeah, late in the game, harassers, that's all they become useful for. They're not really useful for killing anything anymore. Early game, they can actually put out some damage, but towards the end, they die so fast to assault mechs that the best they can hope for is to harass the assault mech while everything else comes in and kills it. So whether you're using fire to do it, the screen shake from missiles, or in this case, the screen shake from light PPCs, whether it's one of those, it's just has to be something, or whether it's the LRM-10 harassing, it's not going to kill much of anything, but it'll at least do something late game. to help your allies.
I do have one more question, Invictus. Would you ever fancy the idea of implementing small nuclear weapons into the game?
You know, I was talking about this in Discord yesterday with some people, and I have flirted with the idea of having basically a Moab type weapon, because small nuclear weapons, no matter how small they are, it begins to get impractical. That's more of a map event than it is an actual weapon, because it would just wipe out so much of the map that, I mean, just having that as a normal weapon to reload would just be kind of silly. It would be amusing, but it would also be tactically weird, in that it would just kind of be a reset button.
Gives me an idea for a map.
But a Moab type weapon, and by doing this, you can also, avoid the canon problem of, usually you're not going to use nuclear weapons because it was really looked down on. So it was very rare.
But during clan invasion, that kind of just went out the window, though.
Well, I think it was more the Jihad. After the Age of War, even during the clan invasion, I think it was very rare. I know Turtle Bay was a famous example, but otherwise...
Was that nuke or was that just orbital bombardment?
I think that was orbital bombardment, but I don't know if they would have used nukes, or what they would have used in that situation.
Because the only map that I'm aware of that actually has something similar to that is Stone Rose. There's like a generator off on a plateau. If you shoot it, it does replicate that.
But I think if you have a Moab-type weapon for, like the Shiva, I think that would be tactically useful, because the explosion radius would be small enough to where you would actually have to find like a group of assault mechs. It would be a tactical weapon rather than a just lol, let me wipe out half the map. I mean, I don't think you would have to call it something like a Moab, because calling it a little nuclear weapon was just, nuclear weapons are so powerful. If it was just this little, if it was small enough to make sense as a tactical weapon, it's probably not a nuke anyway.
Provided decoders, you could do a electromagnetic salt bomb that fucks with radar and or heat dissipation.
Well, heat would... I'm not even sure how that would work. I mean, that would take a lot of coding.
Yeah, that's why I said provided decoders.
So for those of us that don't know what it is, what's a Moab?
Mother of all bombs.
Well,
Ah.
I use that term because there's an actual term for it. It's the successor to a fuel air bomb. The old daisy cutter. There's a thermobaric weapon, maybe?
It's thermobaric.
Yeah, thermobaric weapon. So it's basically like in Vietnam, the old daisy cutter.
Basically, what it does is it explodes. It releases a very volatile chemical gas, which ignites, which creates a huge fucking blast wave.
Specifically, this is all explosive filler. Like, that gas does not have any oxidizer in it, so all of the payload mass is just explosive and it reacts with the air.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's incredibly fucking nasty.
So if that's the case, then, and if I doubt you would, if it was ever implemented, I doubt you would apply it to even a Shiva, considering someone could just roll with it all the time.
Well, it would be prohibitively expensive, but it would probably be only on the Shiva. I don't think I'd put it on the Xerxes, because it's kind of against clan doctrine.
Why not?
The Xerxes is powerful enough as it is.
Why not have a calling on like Call of Duty or something where you could call on an airstrike or a missile strike? Is there some way you could implement something of that nature?
I have experimented with artillery strikes off map, bombardments, cruise missiles, stuff like that. Basically, what you do is you just make it as a weapon, and then you put that weapon as a charge. So you have to hold it down and point it at something for 4 or 5 seconds, like almost like a tag beam. And then what you do is you tie the weapon to a helper that's probably about 2 or 3 kilometers above where the player is, where the vehicle is. And so effectively it would be shooting, but it would be shooting from way up in the sky and falling. I tried this on, I believe, a Raven, and I got pretty far on it, but I decided that the only vehicle that would make sense to use this would be probably the Swiftwind. So you would put all the weapons and then you would tag the helpers in 30S Max to be, 3,000 meters above. That way it would look like it was falling from the sky. But to put that on like regular mech variants and stuff, I would have to go back in the engine or back in 3ds Max in the source files and do that, and it got to the point to where the only way it would be worth implementing would be to have a specialized vehicle that would basically only be its only weapons would be calling in expensive strikes like that. And that would, if the Swiftwind, for some reason ever made it into the game, that would be the point of it. Because I think the original point was it was supposed to provide full radar and then you could bring BA weapons in it. And even, in my opinion, that's just not enough to justify its existence. And, if we had devs in the time, I think that's where you would find it. Is you get the Swiftwind and then you go around and you basically point at stuff. And another thing that we would have to have a UI, so basically you would have to say, hold it down, please, and then you'd have to have a little clock on the UI to count down, and then once you successfully fired, it would say it's on its way, and all that stuff's just even more flash work. So, it's possible, but it's not worth it at this point.
So all I have to say is, I'm looking forward to Ancient Demise and Ivaan putting in brand new maps with explodable objects that explode into nuclear explosions, I guess.
I always wanted a map to where there was nukes in the distance, and then the shockwave would come and it would damage everything as it flies over the map. Is that possible?
Now that would be interesting.
I think it would be actually making extractable objects not so difficult, like Proxema mentioned, like on strongholds, for example, we can do the same and multiply the effect by significantly, so it destroys everything within 1 kilometer even, so you can play around with it pretty easily. The only thing would be how to trigger those explosions, or what should be triggering those explosions.
Here's a thought, Ivaan. Is there like a weapon or something that you can put in-game that slowly damages an object and have that object basically explode into the nuclear explosion that you want, and then you can have that it can damage that object either quickly or slowly, or you can increase the health of the object high or low and then adjust the amount of time that it cooks before exploding?
I'm not sure. I never really experienced with or experimented with such things. Only tried a destructible object thingy, but I never made it into a map. It was just a concept, but I don't know if Ancient has done something like
So, I think theoretically you can. It just depends on if a flow graph nodes exist. I'm not sure if they do. It may need some code work to do that. But if they exist, you could have it spawn some kind of weapon that does that kind of damage or effect tied to a destructible object.
And that way, when the game starts, you literally wait for about 20 minutes, and then exactly 20 minutes in, you trigger the event.
All that can just be based off of the game time. Simply just put on a timer.
Oh.
And then you just have to sync it with the server, so it doesn't happen for everyone separately, which would be interesting.
Yeah.
I just got hit by a nuke. Oh, we're fine. We didn't get hit by a... Oh god, no, we're getting hit by a nuke.
Yeah, I've experimented with some scripted events and flow graphs, and what I've found so far is that no matter what happens, The more you put in, the more it kills performance. So it'd have to be a little bit of something. Not really sure how, but I think it's possible.
I was thinking more along the lines of like a turret that was set, like one of those green laser turrets that was literally aiming at a destructible object that would pulse its weapon every so often.
Oh no, I mean, I'm sorry. To have a scripted event go through animations and triggering particle effects and stuff, if you have a lot of them in, it will completely sink performance. However, you can have a timer set up to just go off at, I don't know, 15 minutes or whatever, and then that will trigger everything else. And you won't have to worry about performance for that because it's not happening until that 15-minute mark. If there's just one explosion or something, you don't have to worry about the engine keeping track of all of these objects, then it's not a performance sink.
It'd probably be good to have it be a small map with maybe lots of repair bays.
I would just say probably just a small map in general. Considering bigger maps, you would have to put in more items just to make the map more aesthetically pleasing, I guess. And the
Create
more,
a lot more work.
Yeah, and as Ancient, Demise, and Ivaan said, the more stuff you put in, the worse your frame rate and the more processing power your computer has to do.
Not necessarily. Yes, absolutely yes, but you can do things like occluders and vis areas to restrict visibility and keep your computer from trying to processing everything at once.
Yeah, I think most of our maps have these, like when you are behind some object or even behind terrain, we put there these extra occluder, areas to block the other objects on the other side from being drawn, basically, because a lot of the default objects and even the terrain in my experience doesn't always do that, and that's what's mainly killing the performance.
That's why a lot of maps have mountains, so we can hide occluders in them. When we made Harvest, we really struggled with that because it's pretty flat and there was nowhere to hide off the rest of the map.
Yeah.
Wait, what are in the mountains?
So it's an object called an occluder, and it keeps the engine from rendering everything behind it. And it doesn't always work. You can still get it to render stuff behind it, but in theory it should restrict visibility and increase performance. If you don't have very tall mountains or only have small buildings here and there that you can stick them in, it's really not going to have a positive effect at all.
So basically, mountainous maps are actually better than flat maps.
If they're done properly, yes.
Or,
So besides nukes and light PPCs and stuff, what else? What other kinds of weapons do we like?
I've really have been drawn back into Ultra 5s once more. They're like lasers in a way where they're reliable. They do a moderate amount of damage. If you got really good aim, you can definitely start wearing down mechs, specifically tanks, considering all those bullets typically hit a single component of that tank, and you can really tear up tanks with Ultra 5s much more now than what you could do in a couple of previous patches. Low heat, so they're really good on high heat maps, especially if you're playing Poke Warrior, more or less. Chained with other weapons, it's really good. What I know is a lot of people don't care much for Ultra 5 still, considering, Gauss and PPC are still the mainstay long-range weapons of choice.
One of the changes I'm hoping to get for the Siege engine is reducing one of its ATM-9s to an ATM-6, and in return giving it a little extra armor and some extra ammo.
Why not both? And perhaps giving perhaps giving it a couple more heat sinks too.
It's pretty good as it is, and I don't want to downgrade both of the ATM 9s to ATM 6s.
Keep in mind when you do that, you're gonna throw off the
fire
lock
rate,
time. Well, the lock
the
time.
lock time. Ugh, I hate that.
Because one's gonna lock quicker. I mean, not much quicker, but a little quicker.
Well, hopefully we'll get the UI an UI improvement eventually for the lock on. Because right now it doesn't tell you when separate weapons are locked really, and it'd be nice to have a UI element that tells you when one's locked and the other isn't.
Invictus, I do have another question about flamers. I know flamers are primarily there just to provide heat damage to an asset. Is there a way to implement something in addition to if you cook someone to count it as a kill? Or is that just
that would take a lot of coding, and I don't even know how you would tell the game. Because when you die by self-heat damage, that's considered, suicide. And you would basically have to make sure the game knows the difference between normal or neutral core overheat damage and then forced core overheat damage. Because, if you flame someone up to 800 centigrade and then and then they accidentally fire a PPC, well, they're the ones that went over. So that's what kills them. Whereas if they fired up to 800 and then you flame them over the edge, then you get it. It's just, I don't even know how the engine would know.
The only hack...
Go ahead.
Pardon me. The only hack I could think of would be basically assigning the kill by default. So if it detects you're using a flamer and they die as a suicide, it would just be like, alright, you probably killed him, have half of his value, because that's the sanest way to make sure that it recognizes that you're flaming him without any, too complex coding. Though it'd be really hacky, as stated.
I could also see the flamers having some sort of kinetic modifier, just so that way there's more kinetic damage, and perhaps helping out with, in addition to providing heat damage, it also damages the mech or the asset more, and perhaps granting the kill.
Well, part of that, they used to do damage. They still do, but just very, very little. They used to do decent damage, but the problem is that it was the way the flamer works is so unreliable and inconsistent that if it does any sort of damage, you will absolutely wreck things that can't dodge it, that you can reliably hit. So for a while, a couple toast and goes could kill a demolisher in about 15 seconds, and it had nothing to do with overheating. He could be powered down. It's just that the damage stacked up so quickly that it was overwhelming. Whereas you try that on even on slow medium mech like the Bushwhacker, and barely going to do any damage because the way it's hitting is just so unreliable. The whole weapon is unreliable. I mean, I've tried to do what I can with it, but basically it's like we're trying to raycast some sort of weird, slow missile that's rapid firing and moving. It actually loses fuel so that it goes out quickly and then it slows down and it stops at about 100 meters. And in order to update it to where, because what it's trying to do is, simulate a stream. And just the way it's being done is so weird and hacky that the reliability of the weapon is just awful. What I would like to do with it is just to have it maybe closer to how it was in, I guess, Mechwarrior 3? But unlike Mechwarrior 3, rather than just exploding in a fireball for straight up front damage, we could do that right now, but it was terrible whenever the PPCs did heat damage. That was just painful. What I would prefer is that when you hit them with the flamer, it's a relatively short burst, but it'll basically set them on fire, and then they'll take damage over time. Unfortunately, there is no damage over time weapon type coded in for base Crysis. I don't think they had a flamethrower. So that would have to be coded in. That's why firebombs don't exist anymore. I wanted to make firebombs to where it's basically napalm and it sits there and burns and gives you damage and heat over time, but that I tried several ways and it's not supported in the codes. That's kind of how I would want them to work, and that's the only way I would get something like a plasma cannon in for it to actually make sense.
So why not swap it out for a plasma cannon? Or unless, of course, the plasma cannon hasn't actually been, I want to say, developed yet.
I mean, it's sort of Dark Age cheese. I mean, I think it exists, but we just, in order to not make it stupid, you would have to mess with it and use fire modes that just don't exist. You would have to make your own, and that's just coding support we don't have.
So for now, it's just a great suppressing weapon in anti-BA.
Yeah, unfortunately, using it economically to actually gain any money, I don't see how that's going to work. Because the game is just, it doesn't know the differences. And I don't really see an easy way to inform it.
Kind of an off, something along the lines of us talking about weapons. What about defenses? Say, for example, I know the Jihad era developed reflective armor. Would you ever implement something in-game to... I know we have Angel ECM for anti-narc. Would you add reflective armor to act as anti-tag?
We need laser heat sinks first.
Yeah, I don't think that's what that would do, or how that would work. At least in Mechwarrior 4, the only thing that reflective or reactive armor did was give you a bonus versus either energy weapons or kinetic weapons. I mean, tag is just a laser pointer. I mean, I don't think there's any way to fool it. That's all it does. It's a rangefinder.
Refractive coding will fuck with lasers in general, but that's kind of a meme to have in game and coders.
But don't we shoot at mirrors to measure distances over long distances anyway?
We do.
You can, but there is like military grade shit that just absorbs a laser even, so it can't get any data. It heats up like a fucking boss in the sun, but...
I mean, tag is a 1-ton weapon. It's basically a laser pointer, so I'm going to guess that tonnage, all that weight's being used to make a laser that just will get to the target, no matter what you do.
A safe assumption. Silly.
And
that's
some
one
like
ton.
nice complementary electronics to help targeting and relay information.
Also,
But, yeah.
do clan mechs, and this is kind of a question that I actually do not know, do clan mechs have ferrofibers and inner sphere mechs actually have standard armor in game?
All mechs have their stated in the original version in CBT for the Prime version. So I believe for instance, the Osiris has 4.5 tons of FF armor, ferrofibers. And so it has, for every ton of that armor, since we use a hit point system, it gets 12% more hit points per ton. And then the Solitaire also has 4.5, but since it's clan, I believe it's 120%, so it would be 20% more per ton. And something like the Owens has standard armor. It has a lot of armor, has 7 tons, but it's standard. So for each ton of armor, it gets less hit points. That's how all that works. You can pretty much look it up on Sarna. I don't think we have any exceptions of mechs using ferrofibers which don't in canon. And the same with vehicles.
So also with weapons, what are your favorite brawling weapons and what are your favorite sniping weapons?
Quick straw poll: is the AC-20 still good? I haven't changed it in forever.
The AC-20?
It's good on the demo.
It's pretty rock solid when it has supporting elements to it. So the demo's good because it has two of them, and of course it's a demo, low profile, good armor. But like
good
on
on
the
the Fafnir.
Fallschirmjäger, it wouldn't be as good if the Fallschirmjäger did not have jump jets and like the supporting MLAs and CERM and so on. It's not bad though. It's
But
not
as a main weapon,
as
It's incredibly good as a screen shake mechanic, and it's very consistent with that, so you can literally lock down someone from getting consecutive hits, yes. DPS-wise, the Ultra 10 or Ultra 20 variants versions, whichever one that you're referring to, will always put out way phenomenally more DPS.
Actually, on the Hollanders, I had more success with the normal AC-20 variant than the UAC-20 because it heats up like crazy, and due to the shake, I was more comfortable in the AC-20 variant.
Oh, something I was going to say that Invictus mentioned earlier. He was talking about how we have a lot of leeway with how weapons get represented in the game. Welcome, Marius. Yeah, so Invictus was talking about how we have a lot of leeway with how some weapons are represented in game, since, in tabletop they're not necessarily as well described, or maybe it's a description for several different weapons from several different companies in the game that all function somewhat similarly. And so a good example of that is take a look at the Mechwarrior Living Legends or the Mechwarrior Online AC-20, where it goes kind of like that. But then you look at the AC-20 in the Battletech turn-based strategy game, and it goes.
That's
Oh.
a different
What?
company thing, actually. Basically, an AC-20 will always do 20 points of damage or whatever for CBT rules, but like you'll have 185mm like fucking Metal Storm ones that do a burst of 3 or 4 rounds, and just a bunch of flavor stuff that has no mechanical use outside of like. Nah, just no mechanical use.
I don't know, I could see some very obvious differences between having one large shell that does 20 damage and, as you say, Metal Storm.
Except those are only present in the CBT and like turn-based tactics games. So like the hit percentage will always be the same, the component damage will always be the same. Functionally, it's identical.
Yeah.
That's why
Makes sense.
I'm kind of disappointed that MWO didn't do that, because in a MMO type environment, that's where you get that would really shine there, because you say like an old medium mech that its main weapon was a single AC-5. Well, and then you have a light mech where the main weapon was a single AC-5. Well, what you could do is that you could say, well, one of them fires one shell and the other fires a bunch of shells, and one's good at big things and one's good at small things, and it opens up so much more rather than just the old, well, it's the same weapon on bigger legs.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But for balancing, I know MWO unbalancing. But for balancing reasons, I can see why they'd keep it the same. And at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, both MWLL and MWO have gone with the big boom. You're going to shoot a big cannon, because mass, and let's face it, when you're in a giant robot and your biggest gun available, it's quite satisfying.
Well, the UAC-2 and the racks are more Metal Stormy.
I mean, as they should. The rapid fire weapon, whereas the bigger the caliber, like the AC-20, you want a big freaking shell, just one shell firing at you.
Yeah, you want a satisfying weapon to accompany, a satisfying sound and feedback. one of the problems with the planet side I have noticed, completely off topic, is that weapons just don't feel good. Nobody wants a weapon that just doesn't feel.
To answer your question, Kentax, about what is the favorite brawly weapon, LBX, believe it or not. I've never been a big fan of the ultra autocannon weaponry other than 5 or 2s. It's one of those metas I will sometimes pick up and try, but usually it's always LBX 20s or LBX 10s that I will go after. Specifically, say on the big bully, Thanatos has an LBX 20 dual SRMs and some medium pulse lasers, or the Bushy B with an LBX 20 SRMs and pulse lasers. And I just prefer the LBX more so over the Ultra 20 because with the Ultra 20 it's
You have to look at people.
It's FaceTime. Like
Yeah.
you're constantly doing FaceTime because the weapon allows you to fire it constantly, but at the same time you run the risk of getting your mech or asset blown up because you're constantly looking at whoever's shooting you. But with the LBX and the SRMs combination that are on the Thanatos and the Bushy, you can burst and then look away and then torso twist.
And also in the same time you have to watch if the weapon is not jammed, or be careful not to jam it. And also it produces the Ultra producing a lot of heat, I think, for what it does.
It does produce a fair bit of heat, but when it comes to skill level, at some point you are going to learn how not to jam the damn thing, and
User joined
thanks
your channel.
to Andrew, we do have very solid audio cues as well.
Yes.
Of course. I know because I'm using all the time. I'm just saying that compared to the LBX 20, for example, it's harder.
Edited.
Yeah. When it comes down to it, the UI20 is always going to do more damage, like per minute and DPS. But LB20, you click once, all those projectiles are so high velocity, they are basically instant time to target for its effective range, right? Where UI anything, you can dodge most of the projectiles. You can mask, you can jump jet to stop your mech if you know they're about to fire. You can actually lose quite a bit of DPS with the damn things if the other guy's a good pilot.
Yeah, you could even run behind some cover and fire your LBX 20 and then hide behind the cover. Meanwhile, their AC 20, their UAC 20 didn't get to fire off the same amount of damage.
One of the things here would also be if you're trying to lead a target with UAC 20 or AC 20 with that bullet time, that's time you're not getting lock with your SRMs or ATMs. That's you're not having a direct lock. You're not using your beams because you're trying to use your big gun.
Yeah, even if you start getting the lock first and then lead your target, again, you're losing a little bit of time to get that lock.
And that means that could be death.
Yeah.
LB variants also have a tendency to be up armor or have some form of mobility tech. Mad Cat Mark II A versus the Bravo would be a good example of that. The Alpha has an up armor where the Bravo is just a dinky little thing that loses its UAC arm super quick. It's kind of cute.
It's quite scary, actually.
However, when they are even slightly ignored, the UAC 20 asset is going to shine or outshine the LBX 20 asset.
Of course.
It's a matter of taking advantage.
Yeah.
With most weapons, if you give someone the opportunity to use it, like if you ignore them, they will punish you as much as they can, and the UAC 20 excels at that.
Yeah, like a Monty B with dual Ultra 20s can fucking destroy everything within a very short time.
You got a flanker with a UAC 20 or something, and you're not paying attention because you're trying to hold the line, your back's gonna go, you're gonna die. Because you're either gonna have to turn around with no back, and then prevent present your back to the line ahead of you and face the engager at your back, or, die. You're gonna die, essentially. Quick reaction is required to deal with it.
Hey, Marius, mind turning off your background music?
My apologies.
No problem. Yeah, and like if you're using an LBX-20 asset and you shoot them in the back, they're going to flip around and start shooting at you. And so the LBX-20, yeah, that was great. It was a great hit. But if you're just in a stare down fight, or you're trying to do a flanking maneuver, the AC-20 is going to be a little better. But if your flanking maneuver involves you going behind cover again in a few seconds, then the LBX-20 is going to be better. It's a trade-off.
Yep.
The other assets that one of the things that I would like to start getting back into that I used to do was, for a brawl, was actual clan missiles. Say, for example, you take out the Yeoman Vulture, you go into a close range brawl. Of course, the potential of you dying is incredibly high, but the potential of you pushing out a huge amount of DPS is also there as well, provided you're not being focused down first. More of a support mech, but it can definitely push out a huge amount of DPS. Along the same lines, if I'm feeling brave or silly, I'll take out the Hag 40, the 2 LRM-20 Daishi, go into a brawl with it. And despite what you might think, well, why are you taking LRMs to a brawl? Those are very direct fire missiles. They're almost like MRMs almost. And Hag 40 up close does a huge amount of pinpoint damage.
Also the 4 HML in that variant.
Very good.
I don't know if I call it pinpoint damage, but definitely location specific.
Within 200 meters, Hag has such a low dispersion that you can reliably hit the same component. So in a brawl, you're definitely going to be effectively pinpoint.
Yeah, and at that point you're likely using it against, big targets, so it doesn't really matter anyway.
Yeah. Of note, a CLM-40. I wouldn't use them at knife fight range just because they're tracking, but definitely within 300 meters they have a purpose, and you're basically zone control and harassment on the biggest boy in the field. If he's anywhere near the open and you get a lock, it's just you either look at me and probably kill me since I'm a vulture, or you turn to the side and not lose all your front armor. In either case, it's kind of a win-win for you because that assault mech has to deal with you in some way or some form. Very support fiery.
MRMs are another favorite of mine, especially the Mauler Charlie, 2 PPCs, 2 MRM-40s, which will devastate any assault mech. It is an assault killer. And I know people like their Ultra 20s and 10s once they get into assault range, but you cannot deny MRMs when you're getting hit by them.
No.
The MRM-80, provided netcode doesn't fuck you sideways, will do so much damage, especially if you can land it all near the cockpit area. Any assault mech hit rank of that particular Mauler variant just has to go home, or they're gonna have a really bad time.
Gotta say, MRMs have got to be one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the most high skill weapons in the.
It's a combination of skill and RNG. Provided that the netcode is fine, that the server doesn't eat your MRMs for whatever reason, if you can arc it over cover and basically blind fire it using your target lock, that is high skill play right there. And you're rewarded by not taking damage because these fuckers all have direct fire weapons and you're just playing missile in a maze over there.
So, Invictus mentioned minimum range on PPCs a while back, and how there was the consideration, probably a year and a half ago. I guess he was thinking about putting it in, and it's since gone by the wayside, the idea. But there is still splash damage that can
Yes.
hit you. I remember watching a competitive game where there was a Nova Cat that charged right into an Awesome, and they joined each other in death as the Awesome unloaded every last one of its PPCs into the Nova Cat.
Yeah, PPC Splash and CQC. It's effectively what CBT won for minimum range, because the fluff reason is since it's a particle weapon, it's spewing out a shit ton of like highly energized electrons and all that bullshit, right? That shit will react negatively to you if you let splash you. So if something's in knife fight range, you are vulnerable to the same shit you're hitting them with, and that's kind of how the game goes. If you're hugging a guy and you fire your PPC, you're gonna have a really bad time.
Yep. It makes sense. The splash, fucking you and enemy. Yeah, I don't think it's really necessary for balance reasons, because at the end of the day, a brawler versus a PPC asset, PPC's gonna hurt, yeah, but the brawler's almost definitely gonna win that cycle time.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed with the PPC in the minimum range in Mechwarrior Online is that if you fire within your minimum range and hit them within your minimum range, you still incur all of the heat penalties for firing the weapon.
For 0 damage.
It does 0 damage, and you still take all the heat from firing it, which is ridiculous because the entire concept is that it's not supposed to fire at all within that range. Therefore, there should be no heat. If you are able to override the safeties and fire the PPC within that range, then you're going to take damage in addition to hitting them. So it's like, come on, try to make it more accurate, please.
For bashing MWO, consider that PPCs have been on the wayside for their balance list this entire time.
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess they replaced it with snub nose and light PPC and everything, so...
Those are still really shit compared to every other gun in that game.
Classic misdirection.
Before we continue on with that, do they have heavy PPCs yet, or is that just us?
They have heavy Gauss, I think. I don't think they have heavy PPCs.
No,
They
they-
might.
I don't think so.
Good.
Oh yeah, and this is the part of the
Apparently
video
they're
that I made, or part of the recording that I typically leave out.
What would it
Guys,
bash MWO?
Once
I
we
gotta
start
get going.
bashing MWO, because it's kind of off topic, but it's fine
See,
to
yeah,
talk about it. It's fun.
So what's the topic?
Thanks for having me on. I gotta get going.
Yeah, but
No problem,
Yeah,
mate.
thanks.
Have a good one.
Thanks for coming.
User disconnected from your channel.
I believe the
Pardon.
topic was weapons that we like to take in brawling previously.
Yeah, what do we
Yes.
like to brawl with? What do we like to snipe with?
Proxima basically covered everything I like to brawl with in the form of fucking LB, Sealarm, all that. For sniping, I've been really taking to UAC and what was it? I suppose LPL. I've been avoiding Gauss because it's kind of a boring experience.
I like sniping with standard AC2s.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Now that they're a burst fire weapon instead of what do you call that? Instead of DPS.
Oh, so they're just a drill.
They're kind
You're
of
talking
like
about like the
they're kind of like light,
Osiris variant.
they're kind of like light PPC, almost.
Yeah.
I mean, not light PPC. They're almost like light Gauss. Just not as not quite as good as light Gauss.
Yeah.
as for sniping, there's only one thing that I enjoy more than anything to snipe people with in this game. A long time, yes.
Yeah. I had great fun with my last shell ending your life in the last Chaos March. Last shell. But besides the long time, I've got to go with the Mauler Prime, the Duac 2s. It is just a long range drill. It just bores into the enemy's armor. An incredible weapon. And, of course, Hag, as Evan has mentioned, is a sniping weapon that is, with the Cauldron Born, one of the new assets released. Just such a fantastic asset. Strong, it bridges the gap between heavies and mediums in such a way that is satisfying and doesn't leave you wanting more armor or more weaponry. But lag. It allows you to engage at longer range while you close in and still finish and get a bit of brawl action out of it.
And again, I go back to lasers. I mean, I don't mind Gauss every now and then. That's fine, but I still prefer lasers over most snipey weapons.
User joined your channel.
Again, it goes back to the reliability, just being able to do pinpoint accuracy, instant hitting the target upon impact, etc., and being able to shoot down aircraft a little bit more easily than most weapons other than Gauss.
That is an interesting point. Now, sorry to divulge, to divert from the previous question, but I would be curious to find out what you guys would recommend as an anti-aircraft weapon, because we are running into more and more now as it's.
Well, with the
received a
slight
focus.
increase in lock-on time that we got, the ATMs aren't nearly as good as they used to be. ER ATMs are now the only option, basically, ATM-wise. Actually, even just missile-wise. It's the only option, missile-wise, really, for anti-air.
Nope.
No.
Nope.
I would disagree. I'd agree with Kentax, but disagree with Domkek and Invictus. Anytime I've tried to engage an aircraft with any kind of missile, they have always evaded. Almost every
ELRMs.
time, even if they're getting engaged from everywhere.
ELRMs are the most annoying, most dangerous weapon.
So, when
When
it
you're
comes to
flying.
piloting an aircraft, the way missiles track you, you can evade most of them if you're not busy, right? But there's only so many threads, there's only so many things you can process at once. If they're constantly firing missiles at you, you have to deal with them. You have to consider them. ELRMs in particular will fuck you because they are always tracking you. And
You
while
think
you're
you dodged them, and then you
They
dodge
come
them again,
back.
and then you dodge them again, and on the fourth time they hit you because they just last forever.
like, it's
And you
not a
lose track of
matter
them.
of doing all the damage the quickest to the aircraft. It's a matter of that pilot has to constantly deal with your shit, and they're performing less because of it.
With the
But at
old
the same
version
time-
of the
Ugh.
Aero 4s, that's actually what Invictus was describing. That's how they behaved, because you knew that you had to dodge them, but then you have to dodge them again, and then you have to dodge them again, and maybe even
It
one more
never
time.
fucking ends. Like, while we're dodging them, gun runs are harder to do, bombing runs are harder to do, and when it comes down to it, we're just frankly easier targets because of the nature of the turns that have to be made to dodge them.
I would have to make a counterpoint here. While you said it makes them more difficult, they're still doable. At the same time, this pilot, one player out of the enemy team, is diverting all of their attention in making your life harder, but not impossible to do. So you have taken the attention of one player, while you are engaging another player. So
That's
you're
true
now
with-
diverting two players from the team while taking one on the other team.
Of note is the price point of most ASF that would be able to dodge and still be a threat at the same time. When it comes down to it, a fucking ELRM Partisan, ELRM... What's that shitty starter asset with ELRM? I think there's
Owens.
one. The shitty Owens. All it takes is
One damn
guy.
Chevalier.
Yeah, one damn Chevalier, basically. To
Because
really
you could also
fuck
never
you up.
know how many missiles are coming at you too.
Yeah.
You take a risk.
So
But
when it
this
comes
is
down
also
to it,
assets that are almost certainly dictated to destroy anti-air. They are going for an anti-air asset, and they are coming to destroy you.
That is one of the reasons why it's not always not everybody knows the rule. Sort of a gentleman's agreement not to take aircraft in any game that's less than 6v6, because it's like that rule that we have in Chaos March started because it was a rule that the PR manager from Living Legends, from probably some, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, made up that rule for pub games.
That's absolutely fair. I mean, at the
Mind
end of the
you,
day, it's a
you're-
Mechwarrior game. It is a combined arms. I will grant you that. It's just most of the time you're fighting things on the ground. You want to bring something so you can have a nice brawl with a mech. You want to shoot a BA. You want to blow up a tank. Aircraft can break line of sight so easily that engaging them is quite difficult. That most times you need to bring an anti-air asset. Proxima, you must agree on Chaos March. If you are worried about air, you bring a singular asset that will deal with it, while the rest of the team can engage. Sure.
Always.
Exactly. So
Of
it is
note,
one of those
any
things.
smart drop commander in Chaos March is going to take an asset that can not only engage air, but can engage mechs effectively.
Why
Those should be-
riflemen are so powerful in this regard that they have like dual purpose. But
The
Yeah.
4 Warlords Riflemen, the 4 LPL Masakari if you want to go to like clan assaults.
no one's going to bring a Masakari as a
I
an
mean-
anti-air asset plus.
Well,
I have, and it worked.
One trick pony AA from the ground is meant to be a thing of the past anyway. Most of them are supposed to be dual purpose, or they're good enough against ground.
But this brings us
There's
back to
a-
the issue of one person trying to fuck up air. Air is still fucking up another player while taking away their attention.
It depends on the person trying to fuck up the air. Because if they just take a cheap throwaway lorem asset, you're taking mental attention from them. But the same can be said of a fucking Osiris trying to bat away at a Daishi. When it comes down to it, assets versus asset selection is important. And a 100k or so Xerxes versus a fucking ERM Owens is like, okay, it's one player dedicating his time to fucking up another player, but do you want a starter asset to so effectively defeat an aircraft that's the same price as upper tier assaults just because it's an aircraft? Like,
This is not a matter of defeating a Xerxes that easily, because it wouldn't. 100% the dear ones would not. But the Xerxes would almost certainly kill multiple units without them being able to realistically retaliate.
that's why I disagree. Anti-air operations in Living Legends are actually sort of easy when it comes down to it. The main thing is the pugs don't know
Yeah.
how to look up. Holy fucking there's a reason why I don't take air and bugs. It's not because air is like the bestest thing ever, but because nobody looks up. I'm basically playing the game by myself unless there's like veterans on that team.
That and even veterans will prioritize shooting you rather than dodging when you're attacking them.
Yeah, so
Just
you fucking
prioritize
get
dodge
it.
and then shoot when you fly off. Is the best
Like-
thing you can do.
They shoot at you, they get some decent hits, you're at so-and-so percentage because aircraft are so relatively fragile. You drop your bombs and cockpit them and fly away, and that was the only person shooting at you. So it's like, it's a matter of doctrine and how you approach it, because when it comes down to it, okay, multiple players being fucked up by one guy does sound iffy, but you can still do that on the ground in a wide variety of assets that don't even approach the upper tier of costs.
Most cases where ground-to-ground combat comes in and you're fucking up multiple people, that they have a fair chance of retaliating, either by getting close, choosing their battlegrounds, choosing their approach. With aircraft, it is so much more of breaking line of sight, ballooning, or just getting out of engagement range.
Ballooning's not really nearly as much of a problem anymore. Like, I fly
Yeah.
aircraft, and I cannot balloon for nearly what it was worth before, because it used to be I could fly way up, turn around, come in, fire at my maximum range, of like, 900 or something with my lasers and Gauss or whatever I had equipped, and then pull up, fly up, and hey, I only got to like 650 meters, or no, sorry, more like 750 meters before I had to turn up. And so most people's lasers still, like their medium lasers and stuff, aren't in range, so maybe only half their firepower or less is able to get a beat on me. Nowadays, when I take an aircraft, I have to get way, way closer in order to fire those weapons. Well, rather, I'll fire them at a distance, but then I'm not able to pull up before I come in close range. There was a Chaos March a while back where I was running Visigoth with ERPPC, and I think I only got 2 shots off with the RPPC before I was down to 10% health, and they didn't have any dedicated anti-air. It was simply the fact that current maneuverability on aircraft makes it so that you have to come closer.
Well, I will have to congratulate Invictus on the new flight model. That was...
Well, I can still do it after some practice. I can still balloon pretty well, but it just slows down the DPS a lot.
Yeah, they'll still get hits on you.
It's basically, I only balloon really dangerous stuff, like a Vulture Alpha.
Perhaps I'm just having too many flashbacks to Saber's antics.
That's all I can think of, is because I do make it a point to fly at least like once or so every game that the map hasn't. And time to target, your acceleration, deceleration, and the speed required to basically boom and zoom, you're sacrificing so many of these different factors to actually do a gun run, and somewhere they're gonna find time to accurately engage you, or there's gonna be a guy like 500 meters away who could engage you the entire time, fucking you up. It's like, it really is a matter of them taking the time, looking up and be like, that fucker's going in for a gun run, and just gatting you.
At the same time, trying to do that on a very fast moving target that can move in 3 axes.
That argument would hold well if they were simply faster, did not have skybox constraints and all that, but acceleration and deceleration have been sort of nerfed. Like,
But even if you
with
are...
Afterburner.
Even if you're going for a gun run, like most assets, well, let's say if we're going for one of the UAC 20s, they're not going to really have a chance of getting you if you're in 600 meters. What about beams? Have a good chance, as Prox has mentioned, for some anti-air. Some of the lighter weapons, like UAC
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 10s can
2s.
fuck you up.
UAC
so-
10s are amazing anti-air. It's my favorite anti-air weapon.
Yeah.
Still has to get in range of the target you're engaging, or you're being
650
engaged.
meters, and you're in the
50.
air with primarily no cover. Yeah,
Most-
650.
Which is why most pilots these days that I have noticed are flying low. They are hovering, they are flying over the horizon and quickly out of sight. They are maintaining a low position so it's break line of sight. You're going to have about, I'm going to give leniency, I'm going to go about 10 seconds if someone's doing a good gun run of engaging someone who might be directly above you or coming over a hill. You might not be able to see them exactly above you. And you have 3 seconds, 5 seconds to do some damage. If you're not the one being targeted, you have about 15 seconds for them to go down, do their damage, and pull back up. And they have to be in range. Again, these lighter assets, these lighter weapons, have to do the damage to make them suffer.
And those lighter
And
weapons
be in range.
inherently have an advantage because light kinetic in particular will completely destroy ASF.
I agree. However, they can again quickly break line of sight, and they have still fucked up their target in that 15 seconds. That's 15 seconds of going down, engaging, and going away. Not just I'm flying around, I'm looking for a target. They're coming at someone. They're going to be killing someone. They're going to be doing a lot of damage. Or dropping bombs.
So we
They-
did
they
actually
will
do
do
an
the damage
aircraft
before they-
episode a while ago, so we should probably, because we're actually coming up on what 2.5 hours now of recording, just like finish off a few more different weapon types that maybe I can edit in earlier in the video. So when it comes to brawling, besides AC-20 and LBX-20, what other options are there?
SRMs. Short range missiles.
Your lasers, specifically medium pulse lasers, small pulse lasers, very good pinpoint weapons. You gotta be careful with your heat management, of course, on those weapons, but otherwise they're incredibly good. Of course, you don't have to reload ammo. What was the other thing?
DSERM in particular is a favorite of mine.
I guess you could say if you're boating PPCs like the Awesome Charlie, then yes, you can brawl with that too.
Oh god, yes.
you can very easily brawl with that.
I think that's more of an overwhelming force. Not mistaken, we went. There was a mission you set up a mission for, and there were just every single asset had PvP, and it absolutely ruined everything.
And in addition, if you're feeling again silly or fun, thump close range are incredibly closer you are to a thumper, the more accurate the thumper will be, and therefore provide hits and be able to be more of a threat on the battlefield. Usually, sometimes if I'm feeling it up for it, I'll take out a short range long tom on a short range map and start using that as a close range asset just to lock down a couple of bases.
Of note is also Streak SRM for corner fighting. Clan streaks in particular fire really fucking fast as well and recycle pretty fast, so be prepared to dump all of your ammunition in less than a minute in around the corner.
Yeah, the Warlord, which is having like dual streaks, SRM 6s and some medium pulse lasers. It's very good against anything basically on the ground.
Yeah, and it's an up-armored variant as well, so you're not going to die as quickly as other vultures.
Yeah, it chews through ammo pretty quickly, but it does damage, very, very high damage.
That's another thing good against the VTOLs is a streak SRMs. If they're coming to a full turn, some of them are going to miss, but most will hit. And if they're firing at people and not focusing on maneuvering, all your streaks are just gonna fucking hit the body and just melt them. Ugh.
I mean, I don't think there's much else other than that. Invictus, can you implement an atlas with nothing but machine guns so that way we can brawl with that?
10 MG Fafnir, please.
Be terrible.
Please no.
As far as machine guns right now, the reason why they're so terrible is that if they were any better, they would shit on BA even harder.
Oh, they
I
already
don't-
do, I assure you.
And I don't
Yeah.
have, as of now, I don't have a way to stop that. So I can't buff them until I figure out how to buff the BA.
Honestly, just turn new actos into machine guns at this point. Just combine the weapon systems and lower the tonnage.
Heresy.
Fix BA. Please.
Fortunately, the code is such a mess that it's the main thing that I'm not quite sure if we'll be able to do right now. We just do not have enough code support.
Well,
I think we've got probably enough material for a good old podcast here. I'll have to really cut things down, but that should be fine.
Completely
that
destroy
said,
the...
is there anything else anyone would like to talk about? Because we got Invictus, we got Prox, one of the drop commanders as well. Domkek, very knowledgeable about the law. Carbs here, hey. Ivaan, one of our most prominent players. One of the
Yeah,
most skilled.
we had actually Ivaan and Ancient Demise talking about maps and map creation earlier.
I'm not familiar with our mappers. You're going to have to explain.
Well,
Text.
yeah, they did a great job talking about like what maps they're working on next and what they've done in the past and what it takes to become a mapper and you know how there's, if you want it, there's definitely some autonomy there. You don't actually have to operate within the auspices of the dev team because you can just make what you want and release it separately as a community map. They talked about like what they consider when they're building the map, how they're inspired to make it, map boundaries, factory tonnage limits, that sort of stuff. So, I'd like to again thank Ancient Demise, who's no longer here, but thank him for coming in. Ivaan, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Invictus, thanks as always.
Yep.
And Domkek, I know you're late, but thank you for showing up.
Yep.
And
Thanks.
Proxima, thanks for bringing all your useful information to bear.
Not a problem, good sir.
And Marius, thanks for your few comments you had before the end of the episode.
I need to keep it interesting.
And thanks to our listeners, and I hope to have you all listen in again next time. So I definitely want to give a shout out to Timothy Seals for lending us our opening music, and I would also like to thank Shivoxy for providing us our closing music.
This has been a supplemental to Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast.